Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my regular video series in which I talk about older board game gems. And this week I'm doing a couple of requests, and I'm putting them together as a Rough Cuts episode. Rough Cuts is where I cover games that I don't normally consider or have decided for whatever reason not to do like a full episode on a single game, where I teach you how to play and everything. Instead, these are kind of shorter takes. So in this episode, I'm covering two games that were requested. They are both two-player games published by Queen. And one is called Aton, and one is called Roma II. And because of that, I decided to also throw in Roma I, the prequel, the original. They're all two-player games. They're all from Queen. That's the thing that ties them together in this episode of Rough Cuts. The first game I want to talk about is Aton. Now, Aton was published in 2005, I think, by Queen Games and designed by Thorsten Gimmler. Thorsten Gimmler has designed a number of notable games in the past. His most famous is probably No Thanks, which is still being sold today. I know he's also designed Odin's Ravens, which is a well-respected two-player game. He hasn't designed a lot of games since, I guess, the mid to late 2000s. Most of his games were designed prior to that. The reason is because he started to work for Schmidt, and the publisher Schmidt, and he was the main person responsible for their Easy Play line of games, which only lasted for a couple of years, but had some really nice, light, abstract, approachable games. It was a really nice series that Schmidt did, and I think Gimmler should be very proud of what he accomplished there. In Aton, very quick setup. It's really easy. You just put together the board, which is 6 puzzle pieces. You put them together, and each player has a bunch of tokens of their color, blue or red, and a deck of cards. They each have their own deck of cards with, I think, an equal number of 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And those decks are shuffled up and you're ready to go. Now the board shows 4 temples, and each temple has 12 spaces. And each space kind of is a different thing, or it contributes in a different way to victory. So some of the spaces are yellow, and some are green. If you fill all the yellows or all the greens, you win with your own color, you win immediately. There's grays. Every time there's scoring, whoever has the most in gray gets a huge number of points. There's little bonus spaces like +1, +2, just give you points during scoring. There's blue spaces, which based on particular temple scoring may give you points, because each temple of the 4 temples scores in a different way when scoring happens. The way the game is set up is on each side of the board there's 4 spaces. I think they're called cartouches. In each cartouche is a space to put a card. So on the turn, both players will, they've shuffled their deck, and then on their turn they're going to play simultaneous, basically. They're going to draw 4 cards from their deck, which is the various numbers of 1s to 4s, and they're going to assign 1 card to each of these cartouches. And then when both players have done so, they both reveal. So 1 gives you, the first one, you look at each card, and whoever has the highest card gets the difference times 2 in points. The second one, the lower number determines who goes first for the next few cards. So basically, whoever plays the lowest one in 2 gets to go first, and they resolve 2, 3, and 4. And then the other player gets to resolve 2, 3, and 4. In Cartouche 2, you remove the number of pieces equal to the value on the card -2. So if you play a 4, you get to remove 2 of your opponent's pieces. If you play a 2, you don't remove anything. If you play a 1, that's a -1. That means you have to remove 1 of your own. The card you place in Cartouche 3 determines where you're able to add or remove tokens from. So if you put a 3 card in there, you're able to add and remove pieces from temples 1, 2, or 3, but not 4. And the card you put in Cartouche 4 is how many new tokens you get to put down. But anything that's removed, gets added to a row. They call it the Kingdom of the Dead. So these people are dying. And by the way, I have to say, Aton's the one on top there. I love the cover. I love the red priest is there like, have you been killing my acolytes again? And the blue priest is like, you got me. Mea culpa. Which is what they said back in ancient Egypt. So anyway, these deaths, the worshippers, I don't know what you call them, but they're discs in the game. They get removed and they get added to this Kingdom of the Dead. And when that fills up, then you score. You look at each of the temples. Whoever has the most scores a certain number of points based on the actual temple. Every scoring round, you might be scoring, I don't know, 15 to 30 points, 15, 25, something like that. And then assuming that you haven't reached 40 points, you play another round. Each player has to remove one piece of theirs from each temple, or the next highest temple, if they don't have any. Then you do another round. So the game normally ends when one player reaches 40 points. And that usually will happen when either somebody's close and they put like high-valued cards in cartouche 1 so they get those extra points. And if they get past 40 at that point, they win immediately. But usually it'll happen during a scoring period. Then you finish the scoring, and then whoever has the most points at that point wins. That's assuming somebody has crossed 40. But there's 3 instant win possibilities. And that's what makes part of the reason that Aton is a really interesting game. Because you can win if you are able to fill up all the yellow spaces with your own pieces. Or all the green spaces with your pieces. Or you're able to fill up one single temple and fill it up with your own pieces. And those are instant win conditions. So already, that's really interesting, right? It's really interesting to have these different kind of, it's not really a tug of war, but it is a little bit. You're not really losing points in the game, so it's not that kind of tug of war, but there's multiple ways to win, and maybe one person, you have an aim toward one kind of path, but you also have to kind of keep in mind these other ways of winning. Because I'll tell you right now, winning by points is by far the most common way of winning. The other ways are usually pretty easy to stop. But it's something you have to keep an eye on, right? You have to be mindful of that. You always have to play for points, because that's probably what's going to be the result, the resulting the win at the end. But you also have to keep in mind that there's other ways to win. So while you're trying to get as many points as possible, while threatening in a second way, and then trying to stop your opponent from trying to win in a third way. Does that make sense? So there's 3 instant wins, and in practice, ideally what would happen is one player is going for one instant win, another player is going for a different instant win, maybe filling up all of one temple, and they're both kind of fighting each other on those fronts while at the same time going for points. And in the end, they stop each other successfully, and in the end, it's the number of points who wins. So it's a little bit of a balance that way, because points usually win the day. And the point total for the game to end is 40 points, which is not very much. You usually do about 2 scorings, and then the game is over. You have the feeling of kind of a weird and wonky balance to the game. Now, I got to be careful using the word balance, because a lot of times people assume that means, if you're talking about imbalance, it's imbalance between, the different players. Like, no, that's completely fair. Each player has the same identical deck. Now, it is kind of a thing where, like, you might get, like, a lot of low cards. And in almost all situations, high cards are, I think in all situations, high cards are better than low cards. So it is possible in one round for one player to get a bunch of high cards and the other player to get a bunch of low cards. Each player does get a mulligan. So if there's one like important round and you got a handful of low cards, you can use your mulligan and draw a new hand. It feels like it kind of acknowledges that there's a bit of a problem there, but I find it, it can go to the extremes like that, but usually, of course, you're going to get a mix, right? You're going to get some highs and some lows, and it's a really interesting little puzzle figuring out where you want to prioritize, because high cards in different places give you different benefits. Do you want to be able to play in the higher temples? Then you need a high card in cartouche 3. Do you want to put down a lot of tokens? Well, then you want a high card in cartouche 4. If you want to remove tokens of another player because maybe they're getting close to one of the instant win conditions, you want to play a high card in cartouche 2, but that probably means you're going second. So if they're already close to winning and they play a low card in cartouche 2, then they're going before you, and maybe they can get to that instant win. Just really, really interesting stuff. But yeah, sometimes you're going to have One player has a hand of low cards, one player has a hand of high cards, but it's not like the whole game one person's going to have terrible luck and one person's going to have awesome luck. Over the course of the whole game, it's usually going to balance out. The only question really is when you have that good round or that bad round, is that an important round? Is it like one that's close to scoring, for example? But when I talk about kind of a weird feeling of balance, the reason I bring it up is because, like I said, it almost always ends due to points. Somebody getting to 40, and then whoever has the most points, often the same player who gets to 40. But as a result, some things feel stronger than other things in achieving that goal. Whoever has the most tokens in the gray spaces will get 8 points in the next scoring round. 8 points is massive when the game ends at 40. And then when you have the greens and the yellow spaces, now you have to fill up all the yellow spaces or all the green spaces in order to win that way. Well, that needs a lot of tokens. You have to be able to put high cards in cartouche 4, so you're putting down lots of tokens, and cartouche 3, so you get lots of tokens in the high temples, because there's yellow and green spaces in there. You got to get them in there. So you're burning a lot of your high cards trying to do this, and it takes a lot of tokens. But to stop it, your opponent doesn't need to commit many tokens, right? Just a couple of tokens in a couple of those spaces, and that's enough to stop your plan. And in the meantime, they're dedicating all their tokens to other things, right? Maybe filling up a temple or just going for points, which again is the most common way of winning. So yellows and greens, so it's achievable, and I have lost a game due to yellows and greens. It's definitely possible, and it's nice that there's that threat there. Here's my overall take of Aton, is that it feels like it was a larger game. It feels like it was maybe played to a higher point total, maybe to 50 or even 60, I don't know. And they decided, whether it was the designer or the publisher or together, they decided that maybe that game was just a touch too long, and they decided to bring it down to 40 points. Game still works, but then it makes it much easier to win by points, and it makes certain things that give you points more powerful and makes the instant win conditions more difficult to achieve in that very short time period. The game is short, and the game has a lot of variety, and so, like I said, it's an interesting puzzle. You know, every time you get a little hand, what's the best way to achieve that? I would say, like, Aton is a great game. It just feels a little off in that part. But it's workable. Like, it plays fine as it is, and it's a nice, short, clever game. And it's short in part because it's the 40-point total, but it just feels like a kind of a quicker, shorter version of a better game. And I want to play that other game. I'm usually a fan of short games, but sometimes you make a game too short and it's not satisfying. It's always considered to be kind of a design achievement if you can make this really clever, interesting designed game, has lots of interesting decisions in a short period of time. That's like a grail, right? That's a design achievement to achieve that. It just feels, that part of it feels a little unsatisfying. It always feels like it ends a little quicker than it should. It's just a feeling, right? But the game still works as it is. It's definitely worth a try. And if you want to find the game, it's really easy to find on the aftermarket. So this game came out in 2005. I think it had a couple of printings between 2005 and 2006. Nothing since then. Copies are going for quite cheap on the aftermarket. And I don't think they'll reprint this as a result. There isn't a huge amount of demand for it. There's lots of copies floating around. I think they were actually giving this away as like a freebie to one of the BoardGameGeek conventions, maybe in the early 2010s. If you can find a copy cheap on the aftermarket, which shouldn't be too hard to find, it's definitely worth checking out. Don't pay a lot of money for it, but if you can get a deal on it, try it, check it out. It doesn't suit your interests, move it along, but you may like it. So the next game or games that I'm going to talk about are Roma and Roma II, Arena. The Arena Roma II was the request, but it feels weird to talk about one without talking about the other. So I'm going to talk about Roma and Roma II, and they're extremely similar. So they're going to blur together for the purpose of the rough cuts. There's not going to be separate sections for Roma and Roma II. So a little bit of backstory about Roma. Roma came out same year as Aton, I think, 2005. Two-player game published by Queen, designed by Stefan Feld. Stefan Feld is, of course, an extremely famous game designer within the hobby, and he has tons and tons of fans. And there is a really kind of Feld style of game that Roma isn't. And Roma, I believe, is his first published game design. It's certainly the first game I've heard of from his. So if you're a fan of Stefan Feld, and you're interested in the history of games and designers, where they came from, you should definitely check out Roma, because it was his first published game design. And just interesting to see kind of, the progression he's taken from this game, which feels almost like a two-player battle collectible card game style of game, which is not a genre I'm really familiar with. So I'm painting a picture that I'm not sure I know how to paint, but it definitely gives that vibe to me. Now, in Roma and Roma II, there's a deck of cards, and the cards have various abilities on them, and they have costs and they have defenses. And in front of each player, there are 6 spaces, and they're numbered 1 to 6. And Roma 2 has a 7th space, which I'll explain later. There's also extra spaces on the ends that for drawing cards and also for getting money. The idea is each of the 6 spaces, the numbered spaces, correspond to a number of pips on dice. On your turn, you're going to be rolling 3 dice, and you're going to be assigning dice to each of the spaces. So each of the 6 spaces can have a card associated with it that you've placed by spending money, and then putting that card down in front of that space. And you activate it by placing a die of the same value as the space. So if you have a card by space 3, it just sits there. But if you roll a 3, you get to put the 3 on the space, and then you get to activate the card, do whatever it does. Some of them give you points. Some of them attack the other player's card, sometimes kind of on the opposite side, right? So it's a bit of back and forth. It's quite confrontational. But you can also assign dice to get money. So if you put in a 5 on the money space, then you'll get 5 coins. And there's a draw card space. And if you put a 3 on the draw card space, you'll draw 3 cards. But you only keep 1. No matter how many you draw, you just keep 1. Just the higher the die, the more choices you get. So you're rolling 3 dice, but then you get to assign the dice in whatever order you want. So you can assign a die to get money, and that money allows you to play a card. That doesn't need a die, it just needs money. And then if you're putting a card on the same space as a different die that you've rolled, you can immediately activate it, right? So you can do these kind of fun combos. The style of game is very, very confrontational, because the way it works is each player has a pool of victory points. And every turn, you lose victory points, 1 per every space in front of you, the 6 spaces, the numbered spaces, that are not occupied with cards. At the beginning, you'll be able to put some out there. I think maybe 4. 4 of the 6 spaces will be occupied by cards. And so, there'll be 2 spaces empty on your first turn. And so you're immediately losing 2 victory points. But then you play your turn. So you're desperately trying to get money so you can buy and get cards, so you can buy cards to play and fill up so you're not losing victory points anymore. So there's a real back and forth push in terms of trying to get cards down so you're not losing victory points, but also trying to activate cards that give you victory points or attack the other player's card so those cards get removed so they're losing more victory points on their turn. And when one player runs out of victory points, they lose. So it's a real struggle of a game. It's real back and forth. And like Aton, it gets the feeling of a longer game in a short time frame, for good and ill, because sometimes the game is over before you know it. The box says like 30 to 45 minutes, and if it's a struggle, if it's back and forth, yeah, it could take 30, 45 minutes. But it can also be a rout. One player can just get crushed and the game is over in 10 minutes. If we talk about Roma I, there are very powerful cards in the game. So one is called the Forum, and that needs a die to activate it, but you also need to kind of burn up a second die, and then you get straight up victory points. It's really powerful, but it also has a really high defense. So a player who has the Forum is able to get lots of victory points. You want to try to destroy the Forum, but it has a very high defense. Now, attacking, there's lots of cards that attack, but attacking is a die roll, right? So a card that has a high defense, even if you're able to play a card, it's like, okay, I'm able to play this card or activate this card, I'm able to attack the Forum, roll the die. Nope. Couldn't do it. And then that attack was a waste, right? There is that combination of card play and dice play, which can be frustrating. You see a target, you really want desperately to attack that target. But if you don't have cards in your hand or cards in front of you that are able to attack well, you can't do anything about it. And when you're finally able to get a card that does something, then you still have to roll the die, and maybe the die doesn't work out. It's that weird combination of card play and dice play. Now, I love games that have dice as a limiting mechanism. And Stefan Feld is great at this, at coming up with really great, maybe unique is the wrong word, but really innovative, interesting ways of limiting your options, right? And of course, you look at, I think, probably his masterpiece, Castles of Burgundy, which use dice and limit your options in that way. Great game. And you can look at a game like Amerigo, which uses the cube tower from Wallenstein and Shogun, and uses that to limit your options, right? He's really good at that. And I love that part of the game, rolling the dice, and you're trying to, how do I use these dice to do what I need to do? But the attacking, right? Just rolling the die and not really able to affect it in any way, right? If it's a 6, you're probably going to succeed. And if it's a 1, you're definitely going to fail. And that difference between 1 and 6 when it's an attack roll is just too big. Like, it drives me kind of nuts. But my main complaint about Roma is that unknowable arc, and whether there will even be an arc in the game, because the game can end in a rout. There's another second powerful card in Roma I. I think it's called the Mercator. Check out my video on the game called Mercator, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. So the Mercator allows you to spend money to basically buy victory points from your opponent, and your opponent can't defend against it. They have to accept this purchase of money. Now, the Mercator has a fairly low defense, so it's easier to attack than the Forum. And of course, you need money in order to be able to buy these victory points. Are they overpowered? I'll put it this way. The game revolves around those cards. You want to play this game, you want to get those cards, and they're going to help you win the game. That does mean that there's a really interesting kind of learning curve, because you learn which cards are powerful. You are able to fish for cards, right? It's like, I need a certain card to fight against that, or I need a certain card so I can get victory points. You can assign big dice, big value dice, to drawing, and draw, like, put a 6 die there, draw 6 cards, try to find that one card you need, right? Knowing the deck is a huge help in this game. That does mean that its quality is not going to reveal itself in the first couple of plays. You really need to kind of sit down and dedicate multiple plays to learn the deck and learn the ins and outs of the game. Is it rewarding? Absolutely. Here's the thing. It comes back to that oh, the game can end in 10 minutes. It can end really suddenly. And if it ends, it's not just an instant win condition. It's like a crush. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like Aton where, oh, the game is close, but then somebody was also able to do this other thing and they win. It's like, no. Roma is, when it's close, it's great, but a lot of times it's going to be like this or like that, and the game is over in 10 minutes. And there's a faction on BoardGameGeek. There's lots of people on BoardGameGeek who will tell you, oh, if the game is over in 10 minutes, no problem. It was short. Just play again. Can we play something else instead? Look, I'm not against games that have a steep learning curve, but I still think the game should be always, without exception, fun and interesting the first time you play. And then the strategies that you learn over multiple plays, it's something that adds legs to an already good game, right? But when a game relies on that to be fun and enjoyable, and those first games can feel not fun. It's not fun to be crushed, right? But if you're okay with it, it's worth checking out. Now, I should talk a little bit about the differences in Roma II. So, Roma II adds an extra space, basically a seventh numbered space without numbers. So you have room for 7 cards on your side of the game. And that one you can assign any die to it, but in order to activate the card that's been placed there, but you have to pay that amount to the bank in order to activate the card. So if you put a 3 there, you have to pay 3 coins. The card mix in Roma II is, I find, much more interesting. There's lots more interesting interactions. It's always fun to activate the gladiator, who basically just attacks every card from 1 to 6 until it succeeds until it's gone through all 6 or succeeds in killing somebody off. And on the one hand, it's more attacky. There's lots more ways to attack each other. Roma II still has the forum. That's still a central part of the game, but because there's more ways of attacking, it feels a little bit more dynamic, and it feels easier to kind of tread water and stay in the game. In Roma, if you're not getting the cards you need, you're just going to get crushed. And in Roma II, it feels like it's more like there's more variety of cards, so that you have cards and you can do interesting things with them. So I would say, from my personal experience, Roma II is better than Roma I. And if you were only going to get one, that would be the way to go. But Roma II is quite hard to find on the aftermarket. So Roma I, very easy to find on the aftermarket. More people trading theirs away than are wanting for it in trade. Roma II, much harder. It's the reverse. More people want it than have it and are willing to trade it away. So the aftermarket prices for Roma II are not great. I do think it's the better version. I would probably say, though, that if you're looking around and you're interested in the game, you've read some stuff about it, and you watch this video and you're still interested in it, definitely the much easier one to get is Roma I. I would still maybe start with that one. And if you think, oh, there's something there, and I like it, but I wish there was more, if you like Roma I already, then you'll probably be more willing to try Roma II. Does that make sense? And even if you love Roma II and you end up liking it much more than Roma I, it's not, having Roma I is not a waste because they can combine. I have not tried this myself. I can't speak from experience, even though I had access to both games. I just never got to it. You can play one player playing with Roma I cards and the other player playing with Roma II cards. Or you can mix the cards together, although they have different backs, but that's not a big deal. Roma II is the better in my opinion, but Roma I much easier to get. So if you're interested in the series and you're interested in exploring Roma, then start with Roma I because it's easy to get. You shouldn't have too much of a hard time with it. And if you like it, then seek out Roma II for an, I think, even better experience. And then if you like both, of course, you can combine them. The boxes are really big, so it's really easy to put them both in the same box and save some shelf space. Now, I will say one quick thing about Roma I is that there's basically 2 different printings of it. There have been a number of printings of it. The early printings of Roma used iconography. Now, this is very common because you're printing a game in multiple languages. You know, like Queen does, the multilingual company. Here's a game, and it's with English and French and German and Dutch and Italian and Spanish rules. It's all in the same box. So the components don't have any words on them because they'd have to print, 6 times the components, right? So, 6 decks of cards, one for each language. So they use iconography. The iconography can be quite confusing. In Roma II and the second printing of Roma I, they switched to text, which I strongly prefer, and I recommend if you're looking to get Roma I, you make sure which one you get. Make sure it's one with text. I didn't research in advance, but I know that the first edition of Roma I and the first edition of Aton were in a much narrower box than these ones. I can confirm this edition of Roma I that I have has text. So it might be the case that the smaller box uses icons and the larger box has text, maybe, but I didn't confirm that. You definitely want to go for text. I do feel like it's this fascinating combination of what I would definitely have said was a German-style game, right? German style being a term that's not used anymore, but having this kind of implication of being not quite as attacky, a little bit more dry and thinky, not so much I'm in your base killing your dudes kind of game, which the American style games always kind of gave that vibe, or often did. But this is a nice mix of the two. And of course, nowadays, so many games that come out in the hobby are are a melting pot of all sorts of different design aesthetics, different design sensibilities, and they take the best of each and put them in single games. But back in the mid-2000s, that wasn't as common. There were definitely different styles of games. And Roma is a really fascinating mix of styles. And it shows kind of some of the early genius of Stefan Feld. So I would still acknowledge it's a wonderfully designed game. And I've always said that a game should be someone's favorite game, right? It should do something that other games don't do, or do it better than other games don't do, in order to find a place on someone's shelf. Otherwise, why are you publishing this game? It doesn't need to exist. People can play other games. There's no shortage of games in the world. I will confirm 100% that Roma does something that not a lot of other games do. And even though it's not for me personally, if somebody said Roma was their favorite game, I would not be shocked at all, because it's a unique game and it's a very, very well designed game. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Aton, Roma, and Roma II don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.